Congressman, recently a push to give the District of Columbia voting representation was defeated because of heavy Republican opposition. In addition, many voting rights advocates are worried about rigid voter ID laws which require a photo ID like a driver's license. Are you concerned that some eligible voters will be denied the right to vote simply because they don't have a driver's license?
It's very clear under the Constitution that we couldn't give the vote to the residents of D.C. without an amendment to the Constitution, and it should be pursued in that manner. But when it comes to national ID cards, I mean, the identification, I think the states have the prerogative and the right and the obligations to identify the voters, and they should. But the reason I get worried about it when we start talking about it nationally is, you know, they might want to use the real ID. They might want to think it's a good excuse to have a national ID card to vote, and I am positively opposed to any move toward the national ID card.
Thank you. Senator Brownback?
Yes.
The Federal Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality recently reported that both Latinos and blacks receive significantly worse, in their words, medical care than whites in the United States. 1 out of 3 Hispanics, 1 out of 5 black Americans is uninsured. Hispanics are 2.5 times as likely as a non-Hispanic white American to be uninsured. 1 of 3 Hispanics hasn't been to the doctor in more than a year. And as has already been mentioned, diabetes, asthma, hypertension are untreated or undertreated in communities across America. What does your health care plan contain to address some of these disparities in access to care and access to quality health care?
We've had managed care in this country since the early 70s, and it hasn't worked well. It's very, very expensive, and it's the fault that we changed our ERISA law and our tax laws that created this corporatism that runs medicine. Wall Street rakes off the profits, the patients are unhappy, the doctors are unhappy, and it's a monopoly now. Who lobbyists us in Washington? The drug companies and the HMOs, they come, and now what is the cry for? Socialized medicine. That's not the answer. We need to get the government out of the way. Inflation hits the middle class and the poor the most. Those are the people who are losing it. It's just not minorities, anybody poor, because inflation wipes out the middle class, and we have to deal with that. If you have a product that's not dealt with by government, prices go down when you have modern technology. In medicine, with all this technology, prices still go up, but that's because the government is involved. We don't have enough competition. There's a doctor monopoly out there. We need alternative health care freely available to the people. They ought to be able to make their own choices and not controlled by the FDA, preventing them to use some of the medications.
Thank you, sir. Say first female African-American combat pilot, and she served 2 tours of duty with distinction in Iraq. Today, we see a decline in black and Latino enlistment because of one reason, the war in Iraq. What do you say to the third of the nation that's minority and overwhelmingly opposed to the continuation of this war, even as the GOP in Congress continues to block attempts to set a deadline to end this war?
The most important promise we keep is the oath to obey the Constitution. We just shouldn't be going to all these wars. We shouldn't have so many injured in our hospitals, because we shouldn't go to war unless it's declared. If it's declared, we should go win it and get it over with. Now we're in this war for 5 years or so, and nobody sees the end to this. So we went in under false pretense. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There are still people who believe that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, yet 15 of the people were from Saudi Arabia. We need to live up to our principles so there are less injured veterans, but when they come home, we better jolly well take care of them, and we're not doing a very good job right now because all the money's going overseas. We're broke. We got to do something about it. And we can't perpetuate a welfare state and police an empire without going bankrupt, and we're nearly on the verge of that.
Thank you, sir. Senator Brownback.
Governor, does the U.S. have a role to play in ending the genocide in Darfur, and if so, what should that role be?
The U.S. government has no authority. There's no constitutional authority. There's no moral authority. There's plenty of moral authority and responsibility for individuals to participate. But every time we get involved, no matter where, for good intentions, believe me, we're getting involved in a civil war. Even when you send food, it ends up in the hands of the military, and they use it as weapons. So it's not well intended. We should direct our attention only to national security and not get involved for these feel-good reasons of going overseas for the various reasons. And this is the main reason why I think that we ought to just come home from every place in the world and bring our troops home from Iraq.
Congressman Paul's support has gradually been slipping for the death penalty among all Americans. The Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life reports a large majority of whites still support capital punishment, while blacks and Latinos do not. Now, I know this is mostly a state function, but the president does appoint appellate judges and, of course, the highest appellate judges in the land, the Supreme Court justices who often review death penalty cases. Do you think the death penalty is carried out justly in the United States? And do you want to see it continued during your presidency?
30 seconds, Congressman.
You know, over the years, I've held pretty rigid to all my beliefs, but I've changed my opinion about the death penalty. For federal purposes, I no longer believe in the death penalty. I believe it has been issued unjustly. If you're rich, you get away with it. If you're poor and you're from the inner city, you're more likely to be prosecuted and convicted. And today, with the DNA evidence, there's been too many mistakes, so I am now opposed to the federal death penalty.
Thank you, Congressman.
Our responsibility is to spread democracy here, to make sure that we have it. There's nothing wrong with spreading our values around the world, but it is wrong to spread it by force. We should spread it by setting an example and doing a good job here. We achieve much more in peace than we can ever achieve in these needless, unconstitutional, undeclared wars.
Senator McCain.
You get the sense that the country is desperate for someone to show us the way. Not the old way, not the same way, but a new way. Think about this for a minute. What if we pulled all of our troops out of South Korea? They've been there for 50 years, tens of thousands of them. What if we quit worrying about Iran and instead realized that its having a nuclear weapon isn't the end of the world? What if we pulled all our troops out of Iraq, brought them all home? What if we realistically addressed the debt and paid attention to the huge burden we're placing on generations to come? Guess whose ideas these are? And you hardly ever hear his name. This is Republican candidate Ron Paul talking in an interview with the New Hampshire Union Leader. Ron Paul, who raised more than $5 million in the third quarter, trailing not far behind fellow Republicans like John McCain and Fred Thompson. Ron Paul, who has a huge internet following. He's a congressman, a physician who's delivered more than 4,000 babies. Ron Paul has been married to the same woman for 50 years. Which means he doesn't come to the race with a lot of the assorted baggage that some of the other candidates for the White House do. So here's the question. Should more people be listening to what Ron Paul has to say?